Good morning. Good Friday morning.
Good morning, everybody. It is Friday, April 24th, and this is day 30 conversations. It reminds me a little bit, Penny. ESPN has this 30 for 30, where they did 30 documentaries to celebrate their 30th anniversary. And I'm thinking of calling this 30 for 35 or 36 in your case.
Oh, for years of teaching.
We've had 30 conversations
Yeah.
for 35 and 36 years of teaching. And so with that, we are going to announce today that we are going to temporarily suspend these conversations. Not because we don't have time. We actually have as much time and more time than we normally have. But Penny, why are we stopping?
Well, I think the thing that Kelly and I think we've talked a lot about is that we may have a lot of time, but the intellectual heavy lifting that it takes in our just in the regular work of a day. So what's really hard for me is working on our book, which we have deadlines for, and which I'm in the middle of a chapter that's a mess, and processing this virus. And I like that we get to process it together, but I have to process personally a lot of stuff in my notebook, and I tend to write for about an hour in the morning before I'm ready to work. But that window keeps shrinking of the time that I can remain what I consider sharp, which isn't always very sharp. And so when we then record, sometimes I go and take a nap, and I find that I'm right now under a lot of pressure with the book club that we're launching. And I feel like I can't do all of this right now.
Yeah, I know we talked about it because Penny and I are writing a book, and both of us, our creative time is early in the morning. And for me, that's exacerbated. It's even worse for Penny because of the 3-hour time difference. Because when we go on early in the morning California time, it's no longer early in the morning in New Hampshire time. But my creative time, the first couple of weeks, we've been doing this now for 6 weeks. The first couple of weeks, it was fine because that was my way of kind of coping with, the new world.
Yeah.
But that book deadline is still sitting there. And this project, as much as I love it, has derailed our ability to write the book that we promised to write. So we're going to take a break. We have intentions of coming back and resuming these conversations at a later date because we love them. We love the reaction to them. We love that many of you have positively responded to them. And so our intention is that we will resume, but we are going to at least temporarily divert our attention and try to focus on our book. When I think of the 30 conversations, Penny, I shared this once before. I have this double page spread in my notebook where I'm writing down some of the things that our guests have said. And I don't know that I have any particular theme, but I do notice, like this idea, whether it's Georgia Hurd talking about poetry or whether it's John Warner talking about writing. There's a lot here, Kylene. There's a lot here about volume. There's a lot here about, the difference between an average writer and a good writer, an average reader and a good reader is the amount of reading and the amount of writing that you do. And I think that's an invitation to think about your classroom through the lens of volume, which we've talked about for a long time now on the road. If your kids are not reading and writing enough, then it made us reimagine how we spend our time every day. But I just want to say generally that I have really loved the conversation. So many smart people have given me so much to think about.
Yeah, I was thinking about, we created a long list the other day of all the people we haven't yet got on. Some of them we sent emails to, had exchanges going on about come on next week, and they kept dropping and we're not sure why. One of the guests we invited ended up getting COVID. So I think there's, this break is going to allow us to think about who do we still need to talk to, because there's issues that we want to talk about. But I also noticed that especially if I look at it over the 30 days, for me, it began with, I suddenly could stay connected to teaching in my work because I teach in the fall. Everything was erased for spring and winter. and working with real kids wasn't a part of this last 30 days. I've had a few interactions with students from the fall, but not like every day, not like teachers are experiencing. And I've been thinking a lot about volume and how do we keep these things going if I'm online in the fall? I can't imagine not being in a room with students. How does all of that change? And teachers have been so, willing to just take it on, but wow, what a challenge.
I know my district is talking about the fall and how we're going to transition back. And I don't think it's going to be normal, quote unquote, for quite a while, but maybe that'll be a time we can come back in and bring in guests and think about this, deeper level.
Yeah.
I was also thinking that, many of the guests that we interviewed, I'd like to interview them again on other topics. I mean, 20-minute conversation with somebody like Georgia Hurd or Kylene Beers or Bob Probst.
Or Julia Torres or Micah Bornet. I mean, these guys were like, wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So not only will we draft a list of new people to talk to, but we're going to circle around and talk to some of the others as well.
One other thing I wanted to say too about this work is that people who have been dropping into Flipgrid and leaving regular comments have almost become like colleagues, right? I so often will go, oh yeah, what does she have to say? What does he have to say? So that has been a nice thread throughout this, because I haven't been able to respond to most of them. I'm sometimes listening to them in the car when we're doing something else, but it has been really great to just hear a conversation from teachers.
It's almost like a digital lunch table in a way.
Yeah. I would love it if
I have been in and I have listened to a few of them, and I'm hoping the good news is that these will be posted for a long time. So I've heard from a lot of teachers, they haven't watched all 30, but they're saving them or they're going to return to them at other times. So they'll still be there, and maybe you and I will jump in occasionally and join a conversation here and there eventually.
Yeah, I had a great friend of mine. I'm not even going to say which state because she'll know I'm talking about her. She may anyway, but she said she'd seen the 30 and she could tell which one I didn't shower before. I was like, oh, thanks. But I think that's part of.
Now you've given me new motivation to go back and look at those again.
But we were talking about how we've squeezed these into different corners of our schedules, and that I have loved that we're having conversations about what matters. And I wanted to say that two things that I've been thinking a lot about, because we were going to talk a little bit about what's ending up in our notebooks. And I think the thing that's sad to me is that this is not a coronavirus notebook like yours is. Yours feels like an artifact. And I think there are going to be so many of these in the world. And I wrote this morning that I think the reason I didn't do that is I'm afraid that mine wouldn't measure up to the artifacts that will be there. That's the usual writing fear, art and fear. We've talked about it. But I was writing yesterday about something that I think is really, really important. I was telling you this. Life is short. If nothing else, what we have heard from the news and from even people we know that have battled it, and in Jonathan's case, have passed during this period of time, we've lost people. And that if we remember life is short, the years spent in school are short. Many leave at 18 and never return. In fact, most students don't go to college. So we get like 12, 13 years to make learning as invitational, exciting, to like set the stage for, do you want to continue to be a learner? And I was talking this through with my husband last night, because I was in this program at Oregon State where the Honors College had us read a book a week, and there were things I would never have picked up. And one of them was The Monkey Wrench Gang, which is about environmental activism. And that night we had class once a week. We had to read a book, show up. The conversation was amazing, but I left class walking out with two people, and we talked all the way across campus. It was like 9:00 at night by then. And I can remember distinctly thinking, this will never happen again, where I spend day after day in a community of people learning together and just go back and learn more and go back. And what would it mean if our schools were that for kids? Instead of, we had to force them to do work, they were coming interested and engaged. I listed, what if it wasn't about knowledge? None of it was about collecting knowledge, but it was about curiosity, joy, wonder, observation and specialty and obsession. And it was expansive and playful. And then at the end, I wrote the opposite of standardized. because I really believe the next page and a half were about all of the ways standardization has destroyed what we truly believe about learning. And I put at the top of the next page, someone convinced us that school was about standardization, and we were too weak or too distracted or too burdened with the work to fight back. We've been told lies. We've been told good teachers get grades in on time, when grades are such a crappy way to talk about learning. Keep kids quiet, busy, in their seats, that's good teaching. Oh, I'll come back when you're teaching, not when they're reading. That we should be pushing kids all the time instead of inspiring them. That we should measure everything, which mean failures sting more. They count against me. They make me an anxious learner. They make me afraid to write. And that good teachers stress compliance to systems, institutions, rules, order. I wrote, where's the wildness of learning? And lastly, in my list, in this thing, good teachers are predictable. And I think it's the opposite. Like my district wanted the objective in the same place, the objective talked about at every single lesson. I get where all that came from, but I think it's the opposite of what we truly desire. So that's been running through my work over these last few days.
Two things come to mind. That's a great entry. Two things come to mind when you read that to me. One is this idea that all teachers should, what was that? All teachers should be what is the wrong idea at the end there?
Predictable was one of them.
Yeah. And it reminds me of a book written by David Souza called How the Brain Learns. He's a brain researcher. And he says for learning to happen in your class, two things have to happen. Number one, you have to have a little bit of routine, because you can't if it's completely chaotic, kids are not going to learn. But the second thing he said, and that's why we had 10 minutes of reading every day. The kids settled into reading, they enjoy the reading, they get it, it's part of the routine. But the second thing he said was that you have to have some unpredictability, because, and this is his phrase, not mine, our brains are novelty seekers. Mm-hmm. And I've tried really hard in my career to have little elements in my classroom that's different than everybody else, that's different than my neighbor next door, right? There's got to be a little quirkiness in your classroom so the kids will be attracted to that novelty.
Okay, wait. Let me give you one from having sat in your classroom more than once. I was there just observing. We weren't working on a book together or anything. And you had a kid who challenged you on a question. And you said, you have to sink, you had a basketball hoop in the back of the room. I hadn't even noticed. You tossed in the ball. You said he had to sink the shot before class ended and he would be right? There was some kind of battle thing. But what surprised me is the way he jumped up. He stood like way back in the room, and it was like the whole class like this.
A Nerf ball.
Yep.
A Nerf ball.
Everybody in the room is like held in place watching. He goes back, sinks it, like total swish, and the whole room erupts like, "Wah!" And then they all leave. And I was like, isn't that just the greatest way to end a class? Spontaneous.
Well, I mean, some people would say that's a 2 minutes waste of time, but I say that's what builds engagement, right? That makes my class different than your class, or, you know. Yeah. And so I'd forgotten that story. You know, the second thing you said the second thing came to my mind when I heard that thoughtful entry of yours was another theme that has come up over the course of these conversations. And that is, what are the conditions that make you want to read? And what are the conditions that make you want to write? And if you can answer those questions if you can answer those two questions about yourself, then that, I think, will then inform the kind of conditions that you create. It lists all those things you talked about: joy, creativity, all those things come through that lens of what are the conditions that make kids want to read and write. And it's not following the 112-page curriculum guide. That is not the conditions that are going to make kids want to read and write.
It comes from our passion, from your passion, from, I just finished this book. That's one of the central conditions, is not I'm doing what I did January 12th the year before. Right. I have this thing.
Right. So I'm hoping you'll keep writing. I know you will. You've always kept it. I'm still going to keep going. I
want to see a little bit of it. I haven't seen it. What's your coronavirus journal look like?
Well, and I am trying to create an artifact specific to this historical event. Yesterday, I wrote a little bit about uh, coronavirus fatigue. I think with my students, they had, they were bummed out, but there was something kind of, excuse the pun, novel about this. And then eventually, I think the reality now has really, my colleagues and I have noticed this sort of dip in depression, dip in, it's worn, the newness of it has worn off. And I think this is true both inside and outside the classroom. So I wrote about that yesterday. I've been collecting political cartoons and artifacts that I've been commenting on. I got even crazy goofy because I started experimenting with, these apps that make, this is my crazy hair app, right? So with my
Can I
buddy.
post a picture of you and Ryan Reynolds?
And
Now
then like little articles that just make me go, like the New York Times suggesting that very few department stores are going to rebound. Like this may be the death
I read that.
of the American department store. And I just made me go off in a whole different, well, what does that mean? Right. And having those kind of conversations. I have been upset with people who are not staying indoors. And so, I quoted Darwin a little bit there and wrote about that. I had these photos of all the lines for the food banks. This line down here at the bottom is Anaheim. So many of my students and their families are in there. So I wrote about food banks and food insecurity and the interactions I've been having with my kids about that and what I can do. I don't know. I had a colleague of mine. She just wrote everybody in the department, "Hey, here's what I love about you" letter, an actual letter that arrived in the mail. So I wrote a little bit about people getting closer together again. I don't know. Just trying to, day by day, give myself a little bit of an outlet to kind of cope with it. So I will continue to write after we do our morning book writing.
I know. I have one quick write for everybody before we go.
Yeah.
So I told you about this book.
Yeah.
Tell Me by Danez Smith, a poet published in all these amazing places. But I am slowly making my way through it. And there's a poem called How Many of Us Have Them? And there's this short little passage that I stole and started imitating. The wind is tangled with the dust of the dead homies, carrying us over to them, giggling in the mirror. Hear them. Hear your long gone girl tease your hair on the bus. Hear them rolling when you sweep the broom across the beaten floor. I miss them all. I took the idea of hear your long gone self, and I went for sounds from my childhood. Hear your long-haired tree climbing, scared little self sing into the night sky with her guitar cradled in her lap. Hear the wooden spoon thump against a mixing bowl in the kitchen and the heavy footfalls and sighs as mom prepares dinner. Hear the news on the television and the creak of the recliner as daddy lifts the footrest. Hear the silence under the stairs where Linda, my sister, lives. And then it goes from there into my friend's house, hear the furnace rattle and heave as it kicks on and then pumps hot air through an octopus of arms to the room above. The more I stayed with hear your past, just a list. Oh, it was a good little exercise.
Such a superpower of yours is to take something like that and to turn it into something cool like that. So, Thank you for sharing that. And a lot of that's going to be in the book that we're writing too. So we're looking forward to sharing some of our new thinking with you. Yeah. We want to thank you all for coming on this 30 episode journey with us. And as I said at the top, we will be back. But right now we are going to take a little hiatus as we work on a book that we hope you will really like.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. You have just helped us co-survive this virus. So thank you.
Stay safe. Stay well.